What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to All Sports Talk with Peter Burtnett. The college football season came to an anticlimactic end last night as the Georgia Bulldogs absolutely dismantled, destroyed, thrashed, whatever adjective you want to put in there. They did it to TCU last night. Whatever verb you want to put in there, they completely dominated from start to finish and finished off the 2022 college football season with a 65-7 win for the Bulldogs over the Horned Frogs. There's not really much to dissect from that game. The point of this video is going to be more talking about what the future looks like for college football, immediately and long term. Just kind of maybe some thoughts on the season. I'm going to give my final top 10, and we'll see where it goes from there. But starting out again, Georgia, a dominant win in the championship last night. Stetson Bennett, I think, tied or maybe broke Joe Burrow's record for touchdowns accounted for in a championship game with 6. He passed for 4, ran for 2 more, and Georgia just ran away with the national championship. It was 38-7 by halftime. They wound up winning by the biggest margin of victory ever in a college football playoff championship or BCS championship. And it was simply a destruction, and to put it bluntly, wasn't very exciting to watch. So the only real question that comes out of this, I think people can ask if TCU deserved to be there. The question is maybe whether or not they should or shouldn't have beaten Michigan. They did get the win, though. That's what matters. They earned their way there to the national championship game. But the bigger question for me, I think, is if Georgia is the next Alabama, the next dynasty in college football. A little tidbit of history. It's, kind of pulling some things out of the air, but I think it's somewhat relevant. Alabama won back-to-back. They were the last team to do it, 2011 and 2012. They dominated in the national championship. The one difference is they had one in 2009 as well. But aside from that, one back-to-back, dominated the second year. Georgia now has won back-to-back national championships and destroyed their opponent in their second one. So I think it is a matter of time before Georgia establishes themselves as the next dynasty. Clemson had an opportunity with this. They kind of had a similar situation. Dabo Swinney, a kind of, Nick Saban pupil, or whatever you want to call it, or just seemed to be establishing a future program of dominance. They were able to get a few championships, but I think Kirby Smart has maybe even a better blueprint in Athens, Georgia, for the Bulldogs, and I believe that Georgia is the next great dynasty in college football, and I would not be surprised at all, and I'm going to go out there on a limb and say it. I think Georgia dominates college football for the next decade at a 2010s Alabama level. I think they have the recruiting in place. They have the young head coach in place. They have a rabid fan base. They're in that SEC, and I think they're just perfectly positioned to continue this dominance. And they, looking ahead to their schedule for next year, it was mentioned during the broadcast last night, they have one of the easiest schedules in college football. Obviously, yes, the SEC is tough, and it's only going to get tougher in the coming years once Texas and Oklahoma join. But Georgia, if they don't get at least to the SEC championship game, and at that point, barring a slip-up, they do play at Tennessee, so that's the one tough game they have. Barring a slip-up in that one, they're undefeated heading into the SEC championship game. They're number 1 in the country, and even with a loss, they are getting into the playoff. So I think if you're going to put a team as a lock for the 2023 college football playoff, it's the Georgia Bulldogs. And we'll get into maybe a couple of the other teams that I think could join the Bulldogs in the playoff next year, what should be the final 4-team college football playoff. But that's my thoughts on Georgia and what they have in place as potentially the next big dynasty. And obviously Alabama will have something to say about it. They're now going to be really able to live by and with validity say, the rat poison, that everybody is now doubting them. They're saying they can't get past Georgia. If you saw on ESPN last night, David Pollock saying that Georgia has handled college football for the last 2 years, and he is, as a Georgia alum, he assumes they'll continue to do so. And Saban just kind of looked at him and was like, okay, is that a challenge? Well, I accept the challenge. And so Alabama is certainly not done. They had a bit of a rough season for Alabama standards, 2 losses and to Tennessee and to LSU, but Alabama is very, very well positioned going into the offseason. But before going into the offseason in the future, I do want to break down my top 10. This is my opinion. It's largely based on head-to-head. A lot of these differences come down to head-to-heads. Another key part of it is what I think is the stronger body of work and how the team ended the season. Number 1, nothing further to say, Georgia Bulldogs. Number 2, I have Michigan. I know this is the one difference in head-to-head where I'm kind of putting body of work over the head-to-head. But I have the Michigan Wolverines at number 2. They were, you got to win the game on the field, regardless of how the calls go. But they were, a couple of calls or a drive on that final possession away from winning and from them meeting Georgia in the championship game. But at number 3, and the difference here is the head-to-head, Michigan has 1 fewer loss than Ohio State and a Big Ten championship, and obviously Ohio State's 1 more loss was to the Wolverines in Columbus. Obviously both teams also having a loss in the college football playoff semifinals. So both of those teams 2 and 3. If Harbaugh stays at Michigan, those 2 teams are potentially meeting in these 2 ranking spots. The same 2 ranking spots next year in Ann Arbor, 2 versus 3 once again for the Big Ten East and for a spot in the Big Ten championship game and effectively a spot in the college football playoff. So that's my 2 and 3, and I know it might seem rough to put TCU down at 4, but when you squeak by in the semifinal and then get annihilated in the championship like they did, it's hard for me to put them ahead of either Michigan or Ohio State. Michigan is a little bit easier, but again, I think really 2 through 4 are interchangeable, but TCU also, you could argue Big 12 championship game. I don't know what their mindset is going into it, but they probably knew that even with a loss, they're still getting in, so that creeps into the back of their minds. But these, 2 through 4, I think are really interchangeable, and then, so Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, TCU to round out the final top 4. And then moving into 5, I've got Tennessee. What an incredible season for the Volunteers, able to have that amazing win over Alabama. Just probably the game of the year until the playoff semifinals, 52-49. The incredible scenes when they were able to walk it off with the field goal. And they're ahead of the team they beat, Alabama. Both of those teams are going to be vying for that kind of spot, behind Georgia. Obviously, Alabama will play Tennessee, and Georgia will play Tennessee in the regular season, and most likely in the SEC championship game as well. At number 7, I have Tulane. What a season for Tulane, for the Green Wave. It was just, I think they came from maybe even as bad as like 2 losses last year. I think it was 6 last year. It was two wins a few years ago. But an incredible season for Tulane, and able to just win an amazing Cotton Bowl over USC, able to come back late, score I think a couple of touchdowns, and finishing off with a big Cotton Bowl victory over the Trojans. At 8 and 9, I have Penn State and Washington. Washington getting back to one of the top teams in the Pac-12, and based on these rankings, I would say the top team in the Pac-12. Penn State, they're a great team. They're right on the edge of being elite, but I don't think you can say that they're there until they beat Ohio State or Michigan, and those were their 2 losses this year. A good finish with a pretty comfortable Rose Bowl win, but but still not quite where I'm sure they want to be. And then finishing it up, at number 10, I have the Florida State Seminoles. They had really, one rough stretch in the middle of the season. They beat the SEC West champs LSU to start the season, and then they lose 3 in a row to Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson. So not the middle of the season they would have wanted. They turned it around with 6 straight wins to end the season. None against ranked teams or really even any good teams. Beat Oklahoma in the Cheez-It Bowl, but Oklahoma had a really, really poor season. So that's my top 10. I'll put it up on the screen so I don't have to list off all the names again. But that's it for this season of college football. I want to congratulate Georgia for winning the championship, and for Caleb Williams of USC, who I have just outside my top 10. And to all the players who won the awards, Max Duggan winning the quarterback awards. And just all, want to say it was, another great year of college football and was so much fun to watch. But my final point in this video is, actually, I do have one more quick thing that I wanted to talk about on this channel. I've talked about it with some friends and family off of the channel, but I think the reason, as a Buckeye fan, I try to find the reason why we've lost to Michigan the last 2 years, and that's because Michigan, Jim Harbaugh has built the Wolverines to beat Ohio State in kind of a classic, classic Big Ten fashion. At least last year, kind of that, pound the ground game, just continue to run the ball and just beat down the opponent with physicality. This year, I think Ohio State going into the game was more prepared for that, at least mentally. And they, the game plan was set for that, and then Michigan was able to beat the Buckeyes over the top with some huge plays to really open that one up. But I think Michigan is not quite at the level of 3 teams that were kind of built to be the best teams in college football, and that's Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State. Those teams now, at times they've kind of played by the same style, but now they are, throw it over the top, go on offense, don't give you a second to breathe. Georgia has kind of combined that. They have the physicality as well, and I think that's why they've been so successful, is because they have the combination of the run and gun it on offense and the ability to kind of break you down while having an elite defense to back that up, which I think Alabama's defense has kind of lacked by their standards in the last couple of years, and Ohio State's has as well, especially against Michigan. But those 3 teams, I think they match up kind of equally against each other, as we saw in the Peach Bowl. Ohio State Georgia 42-41 final came down to a missed field goal. If that 50-yard field goal by Noah Ruggles goes in, Ohio State is probably, who knows how they would have matched up against TCU, but Ohio State is probably celebrating as national champions today if that kick goes through. But those 3 teams are all matched up to play each other, and that's not to take away anything from Michigan. They are still, they've beaten the Buckeyes the last 2 years. They've earned it on the field. They haven't had any, cheap calls go their way. They've dominated the game from start to finish, and they deserve it. And I think it's the reason for it is because they have been constructed to beat the Buckeyes. But that's it. It was kind of a point I wanted to make about. Another thing, just kind of a overarching point on the subject, is sometimes comparing which teams are better against each other is kind of a pointless argument, because I think the bigger key is how one team matches up against another, and this one, there might be a third team that one team matches up really well against and another team just doesn't match up well against at all. And I think that showed in how Ohio State has, the way they play at this moment, as of this past season, matches up really well against the team that won the national championship, but it doesn't match up well against the team who lost to the team who lost to the national champions in the championship game, if that makes sense. So, and I think that's the case in all sports. It's kind of a theme of sports that often gets overlooked because we're always quick to compare, all of the teams together and see who's the best. And Georgia, it was that this year. They beat all different teams by all different styles. Obviously had some close games. That's just part of how sports go. But 15-0, they're the deserved national champs. Final point, the future of college football. Some people will say that the expanded playoff, what's the point of it? We're just going to end up, having 3 teams from the SEC in the Final Four, and maybe a Big Ten team, or two of each from those conferences. But I think at the very least, with the 5 versus 12 matchups and the 8 versus 9 especially, but even the 5 versus 12, I think we give those teams an opportunity to have a chance to get an upset win. When you're looking at the NCAA tournament, you're not expecting a St. Peter's, even who made the deepest run by a 15 seed ever to the Elite Eight. You're not expecting them to win the national championship. You're just there to see the run that they can make and maybe pull off a few upsets. And I think that's what's going to be the thrill of the 12-team playoff starting in 2024. So next year will be the last 4-team playoff. Could be the last time that the Ohio State-Michigan game really has a do or die quality. And really, even this year, it didn't quite, because both teams still made the playoffs. But I think this 12-team playoff at the same time will, while it might take away a little bit from an Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, it adds to the playoff. It adds to the excitement. It adds to what we love about college football, because you'll have matchups like a Tulane against USC that is a thrilling matchup. Of course, there will be something. Honestly, the rest of the New Year's Six bowl games kind of disappointed, aside from the semifinals, obviously. But there have been some good, very, very good New Year's Six bowls. Ohio State, Utah, looking at that from last year. So I don't think that'll be lost. If anything, it'll be heightened, because those games will mean so much more. It means you get a chance to get into those quarterfinals, to pull an ultimate upset, and to get to the Final Four. So I think the future of college football, and there's other things to think about too, is how conferences will kind of lose their uniqueness and continue to blend together. It looks like probably heading towards 2 super conferences. Whether they change the names or if they stick with what they have, it'll be SEC and Big Ten. Big Ten probably being, traditional, obviously, Big Ten country, Pac-12, and kind of the Midwest, maybe diving a little bit into, the ACC territory, potentially. I think that'll be a bidding war to see who gets the ACC teams, at least in college football. I don't think really basketball. I don't see that changing very, very soon. Who knows, though? But I think the conferences, again, and then the SEC will pick up maybe a couple more teams from the Big 12. I would see more of the other Big 12 teams potentially going to the Big 10. And the SEC probably gets more of the ACC, but that'll be interesting to see develop in the future of college football. So it's really America's game, I would say. Football is in general, and I think college football is so much more special than the NFL in its in its fan bases. It's so much more electrified, and not to take anything away from the NFL, but college football, people talk about the risks of NIL. I think it might, it'll add a little bit more like professionalism, but at the same time, like this mindset of kind of just transferring out if you don't have the NIL opportunities. I think a lot of people are quick to talk doom and gloom, but I think the future of the sport still looks really good, and I'm excited to see the final year of a 14 playoff, but I'm also very excited to see the 12-team playoff. And so that's it. That's a wrap on the 2022 college football season, and kind of my thoughts, off the cuff of what I think the immediate and kind of a little bit long-term future of college football looks like. But that's it for this episode of All Sports Talk with Peter Burtnett. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you had whatever team you root for. I hope you enjoy the college football season. And that's it for this video of All Sports Talk. Peter Burtnett signing out. Peace.